piece of cake. That's the way I described doing the back of the suspension on Mark II Leon. So in this video I'm going to show you exactly what to do and how easy it is. I didn't have any real cake because I've eaten it all, so it's got Jaffa cakes. How's it going? I'm Kevin, this is North Coast Workshop where you'll find content on car modification and DIY. Today what we're doing is doing the rear suspension on my Mark II Leon. The front has been done in a previous video, so I'll leave a link to that up here in the corner if you want to watch that first and then come back to this one as well. Thankfully the back suspension was way easier than the front and we put on new shocks and springs in this video. Oh, of course, stick around to the end of the video as well so we can show you the difference in ride height from its standard setup to its new lowered setup. Also, I'll give you my feedback on how the car feels on the new suspension and also have some sexy cinematic or something of some sort at the end as well. Sorry about the noise, by the way. There's someone putting a shed up in the background and that's what the banging noise is for. And it's typical that as soon as I turn the camera on, they're banging away in a shed.
That's what she said!
And before you think I purchased a new toy sitting there on the driveway, it's not mine, it's a mate's car. It's a very rare Peugeot 306 Rally. It's in immaculate condition, apart from the paintwork was quite badly damaged. I think it had been left outside for a number of years. It had rainwater on it, it had dried in the sunlight and left these kind of pink splodges in the red paintwork. So I managed to get it all polished up and looking good as new again, and that's it, ready to go back to John and give him a shout. Hopefully he's impressed with the work I've done. But if you want to see the car on the channel, I might give John a shout and see if he doesn't mind it being featured on the channel. If anyone's interested in seeing it, some of you might remember it yourself from back in the day. This was basically the kind of Golf R back in 1999 of my day when I first passed my test. A very desirable car, way up my league back then, but obviously now people can afford them. Well, apart from the prices are climbing pretty steadily. So yeah, give me a shout in the comments down below if you want to see this car featured on the channel in future, and I will kindly ask John to see if he doesn't mind. So as expected, loosen your wheel bolts and then jack the car up. You can use the suspension arm that I've used here and then remove your wheel altogether. Don't forget, of course, to support your car on axle stands as well. Now I used a pair of vice grips on this nut here because it was that corroded and that held it in place on one side, and then I used a socket on the other side to loosen the bolt. Now I had the jack in place here just to take the tension off the spring, so this is going to push against the arm as you remove the bolt. And then once the bolt is out, you can just lower the jack carefully. With the bolt out now, you can now push down the arm and take out the old spring. And I just took a wire brush to the top mounting part here just to take off any old rust or loose dirt. I then did the same as well for the cup that's in the lower suspension arm. So with the new e-back spring, I also bought a new replacement top mount, the rubber mount that goes on top of the spring, and I just covered this in some copper grease. Now before refitting the new spring, I'm going to take the bolt out that holds the lower end of the shock absorber, otherwise you won't have any space to take it out when you've got the spring in place. Now this bolt proved a bit of a pain for me, so I used various methods to try and get it out, but in the end I used this very rough method of using the jack up against the ratchet and the socket to try and take it out. Surprisingly, it actually worked. With the lower bolt out, I then removed the two bolts at the top of the strut as well. With the strut off, I then remove the plastic cap at the top. If you keep this for the new strut that you put back on the car, or if you're reusing the same strut. I then use a special tool that I bought online to remove the strut from the strut top mount. Now you don't necessarily need this tool, sometimes you can just use a pair of vice grips on top of the strut, hold that in place and then use an offset spanner to take off the nut. But this definitely makes it a lot easier using this special tool. Since the springs don't come with bump stops for the back of the car, I had to reuse the old ones, so I took them off along with a plastic sleeve and gave these a good clean up. I had purchased brand new strut top mounts for both sides of the rear of the car, so I just fitted the bump stop and the plastic sleeve to this. Then time to thread through the new shock absorber. Now depending on what shock absorber you're putting back on the car, you might have to use a special tool or some vice grips, or in my case here with the Bilstein shock absorbers, it's just an Allen key socket in the top, so use an Allen key to hold it in place and then just tighten up the nut around it. I cleaned up the mounting points at the top where the shock absorber goes before fitting it into the car, and then inserted a brand new bolt into the lower end of the shock absorber as well. Quickly cleaned up the inside of the lower arm and also the outer point on the hub itself just before I put the bolt through. Then refit the brand new spring, make sure it's located properly in the top and the bottom, and then push up the suspension arm to try and line up the holes so you can get the bolt in. I used a jack to help me do this, but then also I used a bar to try and move the hub itself. You can see there's a bit of play in the hub, so to get it all lined up I just used the bar, and this made sure the bolt went through no bother. So So with the nut on the other side then held in place, just tighten this up to the following torque settings, and then went and torqued up the two top bolts of the shock absorber. And then as always, a quick clean down of any surfaces, especially brake discs that might have got any copper grease or oil on them. Then wheel back on and wheel bolts tightened up, lowered onto the ground and torqued up again to the following settings. Just make sure to go back and check your torque settings on your wheel bolts after about 50 miles. So that's suspension kit now on the car. Now time to measure the difference in ride height from its standard setup before to this new lowered setup. So going by our previous measurement for the rear of the car, we've dropped 23mm on the rear, and then checking the height at the front of the car, we've dropped 30mm on the front. So yeah, the car has dropped in ride height a little bit, but it's nowhere near your 40 or 50mm drops that you sometimes get with some spring setups. And to be honest, I use the car daily for work, and there's plenty of potholes, big potholes up here in the north of Scotland that I could really do with having a bit more clearance on the car. Yeah, to use the car daily, I kind of need the height to be dropped a little bit, but not slammed to the deck. So the new suspension kit, since being on the car, what I think of it, well, it's definitely helped the car in the corners. It definitely keeps it stabilized and doesn't lean as much. It still leans a bit in corners, but it kind of gets to a point and then stops, and you've then got full control around the corner. So it definitely helps. As for comfort wise, it's not uncomfortable at all through town or through the streets. It definitely feels a bit stiffer when you go over bumps, so any kind of severe bumps in the road, it returns a lot quicker. That could be my old shock absorbers, to be honest. They were 12 years old, so they could have been like past their sell-by date. The steering response is a lot better as well, so going from left to right, again out on the main road or even through town, it's a lot sharper, a lot quicker because the car is not having to move around as much as well. And definitely changing the strut top bearings on the front suspension, when I did that in the last video, that definitely helped. The steering is way lighter. It is power steering in the car, but it definitely helped make it a lot lighter. Going through town and even just maneuvering in car parks or on the driveway here, it's definitely a big improvement. So yeah, let's get to a cinematic now to see how the car properly looks on this new suspension, and we can end the video there. So that is now the final look of the Leon, and I think it looks pretty good. It's not a major drop, I know, but it's enough to make the car look better. It's still practical, it's still comfortable to use, and it handles a lot better in the corners as well. It's a B12 suspension kit, if you want to know. It was eBack springs and Bilstein shock absorbers as well. So I'll leave a link down below in the description for that. You might see as well, I briefly lost the drone in the trees there and managed to get it back, thankfully. But yeah, that was a bit heart-stopping moment. I thought I'd lost about £600 worth of drone in the shrubbery. Anyway, on this lovely evening with the sun setting, I will say goodbye. Hit the thumbs up if you enjoyed the video, hit subscribe down below to catch more videos in the future from the channel, and click up here if you want to see more how-to videos such as servicing items for this car. And I'll catch you next time. Cheers!